Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this episode. I want to pick up something that's top of mind for many of us. We talk about digital transformation, we talk about supply chain, but no other time like now in the pandemic age has that come to light in a way that we can all feel and experience it. I read an article last night and it talked about all of the produce that's going to waste. I read another article that talked about the food shortages that are likely to come through the remaining part of the year. And it turns out that 60% of the onions that are grown in this country actually end up at restaurants. And the reality is those restaurants aren't using those onions anyway. And those farmers that are able to repackage onions away from large bulk bags into small grocery bags, the sort of stuff that you and I would buy at the grocery store, and redistribute sort of that supply to the right places are actually able to work through this. And others are actually just letting the crop go to waste. And so it's really interesting that, for the first time, we've talked about supply chain in a professional sense. We've talked about large corporations and small companies, but in some ways now we're feeling it, whether it's eggs at the grocery store versus Easter eggs at airports going waste, or whether other things, we can all experience it. And I wanted to use our time today to really unpack that a little bit. So I've invited to join us today, Mike Landry. I'll give you a quick introduction to Mike in case you haven't come across him before, and his profile is on LinkedIn, etc. But Mike is an entrepreneur at heart. He started several software companies and consulting companies in the space of supply chain. He's been thinking, worrying, practicing, implementing, running, learning from many of the things that are going on in the world. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to bring him on this episode and for us to together sort of unpack this whole world. And so with that, Mike, welcome and thank you for joining.
Thanks, Sanjay. It's great to be here.
Mike, I always like to highlight one thing that's personal to my guests, and again, thank you for being here. But I wanted to highlight that you and I talked. I think we met when we spent some time in Germany. You were telling me about you're a big runner and you go out, and so are you still keeping up with that in the shelter-at-home situation we have?
Yeah, in fact, it seems like I have a little more time if I find those pockets and gaps where I can just grab my dog and go for a run. So she's getting a lot more exercise than she normally gets with this stay-at-home.
Good for her, and good for you. Mike, let's switch gears. I want to jump into supply chain, and obviously we've talked about supply chain for a decade plus, but what's new, what's different, what's important now?
Yeah, you gave a great example in terms of where demand has shifted. There's still demand for onions, but it's coming in a different form factor. And so I think in a lot of businesses today, you think about the disruption, and there's no winners or losers. It's really, someone moved our cheese, so to speak, and that, to reference that old one. So someone moved demand in a lot of cases. And so figuring out what that new world is like and how to reshape and shift towards that new business opportunity. In some places, it might be right in front. In others, you have to be creative and really learn and adapt. But the demand has shifted, and it might be a different channel, might be packaging, might be a different profile of products that companies need to offer because the marketplace is looking for something different. And your example is a great one. So that disruption on the demand side is also, in parallel to today, the disruption on the supply side. The uncertainty, the delays, the changes from capacity to material, all that has turned supply chains upside down. So how do you make sense of all that is a really big challenge that no one even saw coming a couple of months ago. So some companies are well equipped with the right tools and processes. Others have to quickly, make up for those gaps in order to kind of keep the business moving.
So it's a big problem. We've always known about it, but never before have we seen it in the size and magnitude we're seeing it today. You just started talking about some companies are winning, some are not. Give us some examples of those that are doing it well. What is the secret sauce? What's the trick to success here?
Yeah, there's a big sense of urgency with everyone. And so when I read and I meet with companies that are doing it well, it comes down to a lot of it is just a plain old process of coordination and communication for the team that's there. There might be some bandwidth that they're looking for to come in and really help with that increased work capacity and new problem solving that they have to do. So, and then the ones that might struggle might not have the tools, might not have the ability to simulate and see the information or communicate effectively. And so in that case, they're really behind the eight ball on getting ahead of what's happening, but also reacting and being responsive in an agile and quick way to where things are happening, where the demand capacity might be disrupted or demand might be changed. And so you kind of look across these businesses and you really see which ones have implemented the tools and processes to take advantage and to move forward.
You talked about two components that are really critical. You talked about process and the creativity and the agility for companies and individuals to move, but you also talked about tools. And I think in that you talked a little bit about things like analytics and data that give you the ability to have these insights and model scenarios. You talked about collaboration, which really is workflow and capabilities to be able to interact with the upstream and downstream and be able to pull it together. And I don't think you mentioned this, but I think implied in there is AI and other modeling techniques that allow you to do scenario planning and deal with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Both on the process side and on the tech side, if I want to get started, is there a framework? Are there 2 or 3 bullets you can share with me that says, Sanjay, go number 1, number 2, number 3. Here's how to approach it.
Yeah. I would think it in terms of technology and tools. One is visibility, just in terms of getting the data in one place so everyone can see it and can respond to it, even without any other tools than that. Being able to see the business and to coordinate around that visibility is really the first step. And then from there, it's workflow. So looking for the events, the exceptions, the notifications, and how to have a response that is coordinated across the different functions that might be impacted by a delay in material, by a plant shutdown, by product running out. We have some clients that we have an opportunity to serve and work with that are like drug companies, where some drugs are flying off the shelf. For some reason, ibuprofen in Europe, they can't keep it on the shelf. But the drugs for allergies, since people aren't going outside, there's no demand for that drug has fallen off. So they have both problems at once. And so how do you identify those events and those exceptions and then manage them in a coordinated way? And then the third from an evolution is the analytics. So then you can simulate a response or simulate a disruption or simulate a strategy in terms of what if, and then how would we respond? Or this is happening, what are my options and how do I compare those options? So I really think of it in those 3 maturity phases: is visibility, enabling workflow, and then optimizing that workflow with analytics and machine learning and the kinds of technology that has been developed over the last couple of years. And many companies have implemented them, and now they're taking full advantage. In this example with the drug company I was sharing about, they have the tools to be able to manage both types of problems at once.
It feels like, there's almost 3 legs to this tool. It feels like you have to have the technology and the foundation of data that gives you the insights and the visibility across the supply chain. It feels like you need to have the processes in place to be able to sort of rejigger the components and get it right. And there's methodology and there's frameworks that exist around that. And then really, I think what you're highlighting is the creativity, the agility, the ingeniousness to really be able to adapt very quickly and to be agile. As struck by an example that a fellow chief digital officer for a large gas company pointed out, and she was telling me that in China, as they went into lockdown, and it was around the Chinese New Year time frame, and haircuts is an important part of that tradition. The gas stations started dispensing haircuts in China, and so I sit here and think about, how do you even set up a supply chain that can swing as far left to right as that? And I think a lot of that is creativity and just and agility. What are some of the things you're seeing come through, Mike? What is any advice you want to leave our audience with? What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, I think you have to handle today's crisis and today's needs as best as you can without losing sight of where you think the business is going. So that's a real balance, and it's hard. It's not easy to do. But as you're handling today's disruptions and needs of the business, how do you do it in a thoughtful way that you can learn from that and then begin to shift demand and shift to supply to line up to that? I see in CPG companies and a lot of companies, their portfolio has grown so much that when you look at it, it's typically the 80-20 rule. Well, the 20% of that portfolio represents 80% of the volume, and 80% of that portfolio, only 20%, adds a lot of complexity And so there are places where you can remove that complexity to simplify the job at hand today and really use that smaller portfolio that's aimed at revenue to be able to have an easier time to address the challenges of today, but also shift the business to where it's going to be tomorrow, both demand and supply. And then can build back up from there. So simplifying today's problem is paramount, and then being able to shift the business to tomorrow's opportunity.
Mike, you bring up an excellent point because so many of us are occupied on our day jobs of just reacting, responding, dealing with the crisis, dealing with the work that needs to happen to drive business resilience, to sustain our businesses as we go through the pandemic. But I think the point you're raising is, as much as you're doing that and as much as you spend your day hours thinking about that, we ought to all be spending our night hours worrying about the next thing, which is how do we grow out of it? How do we deal? I think this notion that we're going to come out of the pandemic and go back to the normal is probably a flawed notion, that we're going to go to actually a new abnormal. Mm-hmm. And how do we design systems and business resilience and technology capabilities to do that?
Yeah. In some way, it's going to be a better normal. I mean, when you look at the environment, traffic, these kinds of things, cities and countries have been really challenged with the last 5 years. So if this new normal helps us with those kinds of challenges that are, monumental, then, there might be, a good shift in overall business and the way that we interact and live our lives. So those kinds of things are exciting. And like we were talking about earlier, to think like an entrepreneur and in terms of rethinking a future that we don't see yet, is energizing. So hopefully we can look at that.
It is truly energizing, and what a great note to sort of end this conversation at. Mike, thank you for joining us today. Obviously, you're on LinkedIn. You'll be part of the chat sessions. I'd love for you to participate in that. I want to turn to our audience and say thank you for joining today. As always, looking for new ideas and things that are top of mind for you so we can bring in the right experts to talk through that. And with that, till next time, goodbye. And Mike, thanks again.
Thanks, Sanjay. Bye-bye. Take care.